Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to our webinar, Networking Like a Rockstar, presented by Early Growth Financial Services and Course Corrected. This webinar will be approximately 60 minutes, included some time for question and answer during and after the presentation itself. If you do have questions, we encourage you to use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar console. If we can't get to your questions today, our contact information will be provided during the presentation so that you can reach out to us after the fact. This presentation is being recorded, will be sent to all registrants within 48 hours of the conclusion of the presentation. It will also be available on the Early Growth Financial Services YouTube channel by the end of the day. So without further ado, let's meet our panelists for today. One of them is myself, Jason Kennedy. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Early Growth Financial Services. We are the nation's largest provider of accounting, financial consulting, tax, and valuation services to venture-backed startups in the United States. Based in the Bay Area, we also service Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, New York City markets, as well as several other cities throughout the country. Currently servicing roughly 1 in 5 of the venture-backed startups in the United States. Joining me today from Southern California, it's Jessica Olmon, business attorney and mentor for Course Corrected. Jessica, welcome aboard. Say hello. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Jason. I'm so excited to be here on this topic today. I am a business attorney and I founded Vero Law Group about 5 years ago. I started it in the basement of my house, and now we've had over 400 clients. So over that time, my passion has really become helping entrepreneurs find success and freedom in their businesses. And I do this through my law firm, as a mentor, and through the Entrepreneur Success Program I created called Course Corrected. So a big part of my success in business has been through networking and a lot of learning as I go. So I'm excited to talk on this topic with you today.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Welcome aboard again. So we'll jump right in, starting with an overview of what we're going to be talking about. Right, everybody's heard it. It's not who you know, but who knows you. So we're going to get into some details on how to make that happen. Building out a strong network, it's critical, particularly in the startup game. But for no matter the size of business or the industry you're working in, it's a vital part of how you're doing business. So the higher level topics we're going to go over today: what is networking? We're going to kind of hit it from the top. Then we're going to get into the networking mindset, and then using networking to find both investors and sales opportunities. And finally, we're going to get into how to make yourself stand out from the crowd. So again, starting from the top, what is networking really? It's really building out connections outside of that inner circle. You know, the friends, the family, the colleagues that you're comfortable with, speaking with, hanging out with, meeting with on a regular basis. It's kind of creating that second level of connections. And, you know, it can be personal, business, both. Some great examples, you know, your alumni association where you went to school, maybe your local running group, you know, for that kind of weekly jog around the neighborhood. Or Meetup. Everyone knows Meetup, and those types of groups services a variety of industries, hobbies, and interests. So again, touching on that, networking in general, industry education, common interests, etc. You know, there's a variety of different ways that you can build out a network and meet new people that can share interest with you in a myriad of ways. So jumping over into the benefits section, you know, the big benefit, I guess, Jessica, we could say is, you know, ultimately exposure, you know, new ideas, new opportunities. You know, in the startup world specifically, we've got a few different points here of what networking can really do for you as an entrepreneur, both, you know, generating sales, potential job opportunities, referrals to new hires or service providers, or even really the big whale there at the bottom, potential investors. And if you cultivate these connections correctly, this can be, you know, Jessica, could be a powerful tool, right?
I agree. I think the other thing that I love about networking is we all spend a lot of time and energy getting momentum in our business. So in the beginning is just getting the momentum going. And then as you pick up and get some, that's getting more and more momentum to grow your company. And the stronger the network is, I found the easier it is to get this momentum going in your business, which we all know is a huge part of the energy and time and money that we put into our companies.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit, Jessica, about the networking mindset and, kind of what goes into building out your network, if that's not something that, younger folks, they may not have done or at least even know that they've done in the past.
Sure. So I always think of there are two ways to look at networking, and I like this title that we have for the talk because Rockstar sounds really cool, where I think networking kind of has a bad rap. And a lot of people think of networking as, we think of the sleazy guy at the meeting who's either shaking everybody's hand and kind of working the crowd and just trying to get something for himself, or alternatively, it may be a really uncomfortable thing for people to think of going and just meeting people you've never set eyes on before and putting yourself out there. But I like to have a completely different mindset about networking, which is I like to think of networking as a way that I can go out into the world and help other people in business in ways that I personally can offer. And those people that I want to help, I want to call professional friends. So it's not something that's intimidating, because if I'm out at a big room full of people I don't know, I'm seeking out the people who I have genuine chemistry with and can connect with on a personal, professional basis. And then assuming I like them or I'm into their business or we have some kind of connection, what are the ways that I can help them? And that really takes the stress down or away almost completely, because even if someone's much further along in business than I am, or they know a lot more people than I do, it doesn't really matter, because I'm focused on how can I build a relationship with this person, and I know that I have things to add to most every relationship, regardless of where they are in business versus where I am. So I really try to keep that. And then we've also mentioned, the long-term view. This isn't something, for the most part, that I'm thinking about in the relationship, what can I do right now, or what can they do for me right now? I try to avoid that unless there's a really specific reason that we've been put together, maybe to discuss doing business right now. Otherwise, I'm looking at these as long-term relationships. And I think all of that mindset around networking pretty much takes the pressure off of, forming the relationships with everyone.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people get caught in the trap with networking on overkill, right? Like, I've got to remember everything about this person and make it like I've got to ultra personalize this immediately. But it's Jessica, it doesn't have to be about remembering every birthday, their kids' birthdays, what kind of wine they like to drink, all of these things, right? It's about like any kind of friendship, right? It's kind of starting small and building upon that.
Yes, absolutely. It's also could be like professional dating. So we're getting to know people. There might be some people that I want to keep in touch with, but it's not as important to me to remember everything about them. And then there are other people that I have a great connection with, or we're, the best referral sources, or I really believe in what they're doing, that I do want to get to know their favorite type of wine and where they like to eat out and remember their kids' names. So it's not like we have to treat every single person in our network equally, which I know you and I are going to brush on more in a little bit, but I think the bigger picture is the same as our friendships. We have some friends who we see all the time, and some people who it's just once a year and we could get together and really enjoy that meeting. And it's exactly the same in networking. I think I'd like to touch on one other thing here, which is the givers versus takers. So
Right.
yes, and this is huge. My philosophy about networking, and I'm in Los Angeles, so what I came to realize in the beginning when I first started Vero Law Group, I was networking all the time, just meeting with anybody I could possibly meet with to try and get my business going. And I realized there were two types of people out there in the world networking. There were most people who are out at the meetings thinking about what they could get from everyone else who was there. And I think that's kind of standard and can be okay. It doesn't necessarily feel good to be around those people, and even if they're asking about you or what you do, you get that feeling of, maybe they're just waiting to jump in to tell you what they do or how they could help your clients, or maybe it's just there's something that doesn't feel like a genuine purpose or connection there. And then there's another group of people who's a much smaller group of people, but I've come to find that even within our big city of LA, we kind of keep together and congregate together. And those people are out at every meeting, literally top of mind thinking, what can I do for this person? And if the answer is absolutely nothing, or I don't want to do something for this person, for me, then that's not the right person to have in my network, because I want every single person who's in my network, I'm thinking of what business can I send them, or if maybe that's not possible for whatever reason, okay, who can I connect them with, or how can I add to their life in some way? And it might not mean that that person in particular ever refers me business, or, but they might connect me with other people. And so we're in this smaller group of people in our city where it's a bunch of people giving back to each other, and the momentum and the energy of that is awesome. And I would say that community of people is really what's allowed me to build my business.
And we work in the startup community, even across markets, is a very tight-knit community at the local level and then industry-wide. So it's word can get around if there's a negative vibe coming from you, as an entrepreneur, as a service provider, even at our level. Being known as a taker, that can hurt you if you're not careful, in kind of insular types of communities such as the startup world that we're in now. So it's important that you kind of keep that in mind as you're beginning to build these longer term relationships, and like becoming a giver as you go. So it's no one wants to have that tag of taker labeled to them as they go around and kind of expand their network.
Absolutely not. And it's so much more satisfying to be in a day-to-day where you're thinking about, what can I give to this person? What can I give to this person? And I don't know how it works, but it always is coming around with that mindset. And, I can't personally comment on the other mindset, but I do know that the people where I feel like are just takers, and I kind of get that from them over the time, I don't want them to really be in my network. I don't want to help them, because it's not conducive to us doing good business together. It doesn't help me or my business, or even the way I feel about doing business every day.
Right. It's ultimately down to the golden rule, right? Do others as you'd like done unto you. And
Yes.
that ultimately what happens is, the karma shakes out, and you become a person that others in the community that you work within, you are someone they know they can reach out to you for advice or expertise or referrals to, possible job candidates or service providers. Like, if you provide value and you continue to do that down the road, it will pay off in multiples for you the further along you get with these relationships.
That's true. That's true. I think this is so important. We've actually developed within my law firm a practice of once a week, everyone has to report on a professional giving experience where they were doing something, without us being paid or wanting something in return, just something to help someone in our network, in our world professionally. And I think this is hugely important to both, satisfaction with what we do day to day, and also really to success in business.
And this last point here, the importance of chemistry, it's like friendships, right? Like there's got to be, a connection there. But I feel there are exceptions to the rule where there are people that you do business with, especially where there's not a connection there, but no similar interests. Maybe there's a large age disparity. There could be just something that just doesn't click between the two of you. But I just kind of on our side, my side specifically, there's still, I've got a few of those people that I know that are in my network, and we keep it to a very high level business professional type of relationship, and keep it at that. But I think it's important for entrepreneurs to know that if you've got those types of relationships in your network, know when to leave it just as business only, right? And
Yes.
know when the chemistry's not there.
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, when I used to be getting together with anyone and everyone, and I was keeping up in the beginning relationships with everyone, and then I came to a point where I had so many people in my network and really not enough time to continue personal meetings with everyone, where I made a decision. If I don't have some level of chemistry with a person, I just was going to stop the meetings, because what I realized was that if I could say I really do not have chemistry with this person at all, I wasn't actually referring business to them, and I wasn't being referred business by someone that I could say that. So I stopped doing that, but I definitely understand what you're saying, which is there could be someone who is a total rock star at their job. They're amazing. They'd be a perfect connection for this segment of clients that still, you'd consider sending business, because ultimately sending the business, we need to like the people to some extent, and also most importantly would be that they're really great at what they do and would serve our clients well, or serve this startup well, or whoever you're making the connection for. So
yeah, I think you hit it right on the head with those kind of outliers that are just kind of the Grumpelstiltskin, right? Like you don't get along. Maybe they just don't get along with anybody by principle, but them to be a key connector, or really awesome, like a fantastic engineer, or really great lawyer, or a banker that has a very specific expertise and does that really well. So it's important to keep that piece in mind and know when to just keep it at a professional level and not be asking about the kids or go grab a beer or whatever it might be.
Right. And on that point, actually, in terms of professional friends and becoming friends with the people that we network with, I really want to enjoy the people that I'm around professionally, because it's a huge part of my life, my daily life. With that being said, I used to do a lot of dinners and drinks and just all kinds of meetings that really blurred the lines of professional friends or just friends. And I had a mentor who he always would say, business is really being done during the daytime. And for a long time, I didn't really follow that, but I've come to see that I'm agreeing with it more and more, I'll say. So I've tried to switch to doing my networking meetings more breakfast, lunch, coffees, that type of thing. And of course, I still am going to dinner and drinks and evening activities, but I've tried to switch it more over to the day, because I've just found more business is being done during the day than in the evenings.
Yeah, there's a great book that we recommend on the early growth side. All of our business development team members have to read it. I've read it. And if you've got a pen and paper handy, it's called Never Eat Alone.
Yes.
And it's, Jessica, of course, you may have heard of it as well. But it's a very, it's a great book to read kind of in the networking vein about what it says, never eating alone, going out and building these networks, and what that can mean for you personally and professionally. So we can throw out just a free kind of book reference there. I think that's great, and along the lines of what we're talking about here.
It's a great book. I agree.
So kind of stepping on here, let's talk a little bit. This is going to be a big one for all of you startup entrepreneurs looking to fundraise, networking to find investors. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that specifically. And what's a good place to start? I mean, if this is your first business and you're in the tech space, for example, and you're looking to become high growth, you think an injection of venture capital or angel money is going to be what you need to get you to the next level. there's a million different resources pointing you in about 100,000 directions as far as how to get started. So a lot of noise out there, but also within that some nuggets of good advice. But where to start? It's it's kind of starting small. Like take a look around. If you're still a student, talk to your fellow students or professors that might be working within your particular discipline. And you start with them, make connections with those folks, and see what can grow from there. We talked about meetups a little bit earlier. If you want to connect with someone that showed up to a meetup, or if you want to kind of expand, kind of your search for like-minded entrepreneurs, for example, you can speak with, meetup organizers to see what kind of connections they might have. They're great connectors by default. And as an aside to that, through Meetup is another great example, just jumping into events that pertain to you or pertain to your business. It's a great way to meet other like-minded folks that could be looking for what you're needing at the time. And then, of course, service providers. Friendly plug for us at Early Growth and for Jessica and her team at Vero and Course Corrected. Being as plugged into the startup ecosystem as we are, this is it's a great place. These are great tools to use when it comes time to trying to find the right investors that fit what you are looking for in your particular stage. And Jessica, we talked a little bit earlier before this call started, and you had a great one-liner here, and it was just start where you are.
Yes, start where you are. I have people who will come to me and they want to jump 10 steps ahead of where they are. They might be just having formed a startup and want, call asking if we'll introduce them to our VC contacts. And, I don't have a relationship with the people. I don't know anything about their business. They're just beginning, and probably I'd be doing them a big disservice to put them in front of some of my best contacts right now. So I think the big thing is, if we're imagining your network as a wide web of people who are all connected to you and who are all moving business around, we have to start where we are in creating that web in the first place, and then asking for favors and help from people. Certainly the people listed here can help you, and it's a matter of, them getting to know your business and knowing who you are. And I've made connections for people just right off the bat and not knowing them very well, but generally I want to get to know the people and get more details just because I've spent a lot of time developing the relationships that I have, and I want to protect those relationships. So someone who I've spent 2 years getting to know, if I put the wrong person in front of them or make an introduction that just doesn't make sense at all, that reflects on me. And so I'm really thoughtful about the connections, but of course I love to make introductions and connections for people. And I think, for all of us, the place where we're beginning is okay. I actually was listening to the Simon Sinek talk the other day on millennials, and I think that he was talking about millennials, but I think this could apply to all of us, which is a lot of times we're looking up to where we want to be and seeing the summit and not paying attention to the fact that there's a mountain to climb. And it's not good or bad, but it's the journey of climbing the mountain that brings us to the summit. And that's exactly the same with networking.
Yeah, and with investors in particular, we mentioned homework here. Investors, they hear from hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs every single day, flooding the inbox, the occasional phone call, the even rarer instance of someone showing up with some kind of zany gimmick to get in front of these investors. But ultimately, they see a lot. So what ends up happening is they end up putting these filters in place to determine what it is that they're going to be looking at. One of those big filters we'll talk about in a moment there, the warm introduction, but it's important that if you're going after investors, you're targeting whether it's VCs or angel groups, it's important that you do your homework and find out what investors are actually investing in your type of company or idea or service. So important. because ultimately the investors are going to take a look at that and say, okay, obviously they've done some background on me as an investor. They know I invest in their type of company. Great, this is something I'm going to take a look at. Whereas if you are, we just met with some water tech companies, clean tech companies earlier this afternoon. So if you're a clean tech company and you're going in and pitching or cold emailing investors that deal only in hardware, for example, or SaaS, you're going to have investors that skip right over that. And pushing that up to the next level, and to Jessica's point, when it comes to introductions from us, as service providers or as singular professionals, we have our own venture capital and investor relationships that we have, and we're not going to go out and make blind introductions to these investors for your company without doing our own due diligence or asking you to do the diligence and show us that this is a connection that makes sense to put in place. So because as Jessica said, that ultimately reflects bad on us if we're showing up to these investor contacts, which are very important to us as well, and are making mismatched introductions for potential investment.
Right. And I think too, Jason, that's a good point for just meetings and introductions overall. It's taking a little bit of time to find out about the person that you're meeting with. Think about, how you could contribute to them. Maybe even if you're going to meet with a potential investor and it turns out they're not interested in your product, your service, keeping the mindset that, okay, who else could I introduce them to, or how could I help them grow their business? You could see how in any relationship, when someone's coming to you with that kind of thinking, you think of them in a whole different light than if it's more, what can you do for me? How can you help me? Okay, you're not going to help me and I'm just, walking away. But having that much bigger mindset and thinking of this as a long-term relationship, the big web that you're creating, that really causes a richness of relationships and, ultimately causes people to look at you in a really different way.
Right. And, this is a good time to kind of jump into the warm introduction, which is, the warm intro is a phrase that we in the startup business, we use regularly. And basically what it means is you can kind of think of it as a friend of a friend, almost like the mob. He's one of us. He's one of ours. And as I mentioned earlier, with investors in particular, they are digging through hundreds of emails a day, and a lot of those, and you talk to any investor of any size and you'll get the same answer, a lot of those are blind, just cold emails, BCC emails with a pitch deck attached. Even myself, I'm not even an investor, I don't work for an investment firm, I get a few every month sent to me, just blindly. Jessica, I'm sure you have the same happen to you.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to weed through there. So if an investor's got an inbox full of just cold emails that, could take him, a day and a half to weed through, but all of a sudden at the top of the inbox is someone he knows offering an introduction to a company he or she is interested in, that is going to be very powerful. And we coach the companies that we work with all the time about landing those warm introductions. And the way to do that, it requires a little bit of work in that you've got to have built out a network in place that can kind of support those introductions. So one easy place for early stage companies to leverage that is, of course, their service providers, such as your accountants like Early Growth, or your lawyers like Jessica and her team. We have those relationships kind of already built in. So whether it's one of these types of organizations, your bank, if you have HR and benefits, payroll companies that are helping you as you scale, these are all companies that have these kind of relationships in place and can help with some coaching as far as pointing you in the right directions for the right investors to sync you up with. But whether it's your service providers or if you have advisors already as part of your company, or board directors or a member of your board, if it's gone that far. Again, professors maybe that you formerly had in school or in school with now that could possibly have investor introductions. It's never too early to start asking those kind of questions, just keeping it kind of high level and trying to gauge, what does your, outer second, third degree type connections look like as far as the investor world is concerned. And that can go light years for you as far as landing, at ultimately a face-to-face meeting with a potential investor that is actually interested in what it is that you're doing.
Yes, and I think we can all see that example, in our own email inboxes, is getting some junk mail from a company. You have no idea what they do. I mean, it's just delete or unsubscribe, delete. And then if I forward you, Jason, something, and I'm like, hey, check this out, that's a whole different story in terms of your attention.
Right, and the best example, best analogous example we use is job seekers, right? So if you're looking to hire someone and you've got an inbox with 100 resumes that have just been emailed to you, but then there's one email in there that's from one of your friends or one of your past colleagues, and it says, hey, I heard you're looking to hire a position. Here's somebody I think is a good fit. Which of those emails are you going to open first? Which one are you going to take the time to sit and dig through and do the homework on? So, keep that in mind. It works just the same with investors and all of the communications that they have to sort through on a daily basis. So you hear stories of entrepreneurs that wear it like a badge of honor. They cold emailed a bunch of investors and maybe they got one on the hook and actually led to investment. That is going to be the exception and not the rule. So as a matter of principle from the EGFS side, we discourage the mass cold email, the BCC investors, and rather encourage you to kind of take the time, do the homework up front, and come up with a smaller targeted list of investors and try to find solid ways to get those warm introductions in place.
Yes, and in my experience, all business, I don't care who you are or what you do, all business is done through relationships. And of course, there are those circumstances we all hear about, like you mentioned, just so happened to send a resume in through Monster and got the job. But generally, business is being done through relationships, and the faster that we can embrace that and really get excited about building our professional relationships and whatever those need to be for your own company, the faster that you can get the results you want in your business.
Great. I think that's a great segue to start talking about networking for sales. Jessica, why don't you kind of jump into, especially for the startup mentality, what those relationships can do for you ultimately on the sales side?
So I think for sales, in my business, let's say working with entrepreneurs, I want to envision first, who do I want to have in my network? And for me, those are people that I can connect well or I can refer business, and then the types of people that can easily connect for me or refer me business. And I'm thinking about all the different kinds of service providers and entrepreneurs who are the bulk of my network that I want to make a part of my group. And so if you think about that for your own business, it might also be people who are in the exact same business as you. I have a lot of both corporate attorneys and mentors or consultants who are in my network who I refer business to and they refer to me. And a lot of people think of those as competitors, but I've found actually a lot of business coming from those people if there's a conflict or they're not the right one. And of course, there's helping each other out with our businesses and being able to talk about challenges we have or growth strategies or really anything, because they get what I'm doing in business and where I'm headed and what I want to do. So ultimately, I'm thinking of relationships where I want to be able to help the person no matter what. As I mentioned earlier, even if it's not someone I could easily refer to, I want to have some way that I know I could help them, or just in my mind that it's possible if I'm going to add them into my network. And that is the other topic we've already touched on, which is that the referrals are a two-way street. So I am always going into the relationships thinking about what can I give, how can I help. When someone's talking to me over a lunch, let's say, I want to think about I am thinking in my mind, how can I help them, or who do I know that I could connect them to while they're talking, and I might chat about that with them. Now, with that being said, if I find that I have relationships where we have 6 months or a year goes on and I've, been acting this way, making connections, sending them business, doing that, and there's kind of nothing from them on that end or no energy in that way, there are some people who are just in the first group of people that I mentioned who just don't really get it and kind of aren't operating that way. Or maybe they don't actually want to send me business or can't, or whatever the reason is, doesn't really matter. But over time, if I see that happening, I probably won't pursue that relationship with the same vigor that I might have in the beginning, even if we have the chemistry, even if it seems like a really great connection. So it should definitely be a two-way street. But I guess the point I'm making here is that I'm not starting out the relationship thinking, what can they do for me? What have they done for me? This would be more over time, me evaluating the big picture of the relationship.
Right. Yeah, and I was going to say, for the givers versus takers, what you'll end up finding is that it's not typically that black and white. And you'll have people, partners that you've been working with possibly for a long time that you might start to see like you've been kind of feeding them business kind of for a while and haven't heard anything back or gotten anything back, but they're staying active. And I'll add that it's okay to have kind of a conversation with those types of connections and just say, hey, how's this going? What's going on? And be professional but friendly about it. And you may actually find that conversation coming your way if you start to slip and end up kind of leaning more towards taker than giver. But, there's fluctuations there, and it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And it doesn't always have to be a situation where you cut someone loose just because you've, fed them 3 or 4 deals or referrals and nothing has come back your way in any form or fashion. Sometimes all it takes is to sit down, over coffee or a beer and just say, hey, here's kind of what's been going on lately. Is everything okay? What can we do to kind of get this back on track? Sometimes just a simple conversation kind of recalibrate everything so that you're kind of back to even.
I agree, and I'm a big proponent of taking responsibility for my results and the things that show up in my life. So what I'll usually do with people, if I notice, maybe they used to refer me a lot of business, I haven't heard from them in a while, despite the fact that I've been reaching out. First, I might just set a meeting, because a lot of times I'll find, I started taking for granted maybe our relationship, and we haven't had a face-to-face in a while. So we'll sit down, talk about business, talk about our lives, and then if that doesn't seem to change things, then I'll definitely have that conversation. I've mentioned to people before, what are you looking for now in a business attorney that you hire, or what's important to you when you're going to recommend a mentor or consultant to your client? What's important to you about that person? And having a conversation about, business, and maybe their needs have changed and I didn't know about it. And that can lead into then, based on what they say, a more direct conversation about our relationship and where they see it. So I agree with you 100%, having clear communications with people, especially someone that we've invested a lot of time and energy in getting to know and in helping their business, and 100% worthwhile to talk about the relationship.
Right.
On this point of when we should talk about business, I think it's really important that every time I get together with someone for business, that we both talk about our businesses. So the only time I've broken this rule is the other day I was introducing 2 people who I thought really needed to meet, and we all 3 went to lunch. And I know both of the people pretty well, and we refer each other business back and forth. And so I didn't talk about my business while we were there. I was facilitating the conversation to make sure that they got to know each other, and I wanted certain things to come out about how I thought they could work well together. That's kind of the only time I felt good about not bringing up, types of clients that I've been working with, what sort of deals we're working on, and then obviously hearing the same thing from the other side. Because otherwise, I think if we don't talk about business when we meet, then it's not really a business meeting. So I don't know if you have a different experience with that. I know a lot of people will, let's say, go out for drinks and it's just hanging out and not necessarily talking about business, but that's kind of been a firm policy that I've had with myself for at least the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's important to kind of keep your finger to the pulse of the people that you're meeting with, the setting, and just kind of yourself. Like you don't rarely, if ever, is it good to just kind of come in guns blazing, whether it's one-on-one or kind of in a group setting. Just like jump in and like, let me tell you about what I do. Let's have this conversation right now. That is, when you go on that first date, you're not talking about like, you're not jumping into talking about moving in together, right? Or all that stuff. You're kind of taking it in baby steps, right? So, and just like when you're dating and you're seeing that person, like you kind of get an idea of when the time is right to kind of up the conversation to the next level, right? So usually with business, that's a little bit accelerated, but the concept is still the same, right? You should kind of get a feel for the person or people that you're talking to, and try to find the right time to if you're like looking to land an investor introduction, for example, or if you're meeting with like a client, like maybe your first ever client, like can be a nerve-wracking experience, but you don't want to sit down and immediately jump into the sales pitch, right? So
that's a good point.
It's important about finding that time, like knowing when to strike. An important thing, especially with talking about investors, those first couple of clients, something that I like to tell entrepreneurs, which sounds completely bonkers, but it's something I learned a long time ago in public speaking class, was to remember to breathe. And if you take the time to remember to breathe, that kind of clears your head, and you can usually make some more rational decisions as you have these kind of what can ultimately be kind of pressure-filled conversations. Otherwise you could end up kind of freaking out a little bit, or super speaking really fast, or jumping into a pitch way before it needs to happen. So just take a moment, kind of breathe, and kind of assess the situation, the discussion, the meeting, the coffee, whatever it is, kind of as you go. And in most cases you'll get an idea of when it's time to kind of talk shop.
I like that. That's an awesome foundational strategy. I think that's a great idea. So I think that would lead us into our next topic of how to stand out from the crowd, which is hugely important. And the thing that I want to start this point off by saying is, the more that you could be yourself and let yourself shine through, the better. The people that I love to meet with and I just get such a delight from are the ones who are being themselves, and a lot of times they're a little weird or a little outrageous or a little crazy or whatever, but they're just so much fun to be around. And I really try to go out and present myself as me, and letting people know, letting people have glimpses into who I am personally and what I'm working on and what's important to me in life, and just being myself, even if they're things that aren't typical for a business attorney or what I think that would be acceptable and appropriate. So I have this little quote I was going to read of Marilyn Monroe, actually, and she says, "Imperfection is beauty, madness is genius, and it's better to be absolutely ridiculous than absolutely boring." And this, I think, is perfect for networking, because the worst use of my time is going to a meeting, a lunch, whatever, and I'm just bored to tears by the person. Maybe everything that they say is perfectly right and standard, and they're, good at their job, but life is too short for me to be around people like that. I want to be people who are being themselves and, living their life. So in terms of the actual meeting, we are focusing on getting to know the other person. I mean, that's my top priority, especially in the beginning, and then getting updates, and I want to know about them and their life. And then in future meetings, I want to try, for me personally, I try to get to the heart of what matters to this person in life? What do they think about? What do they care about? And then, of course, that also segues into those things for their business. So really getting to know people on a deeper level is how I'm focused on building relationships at the actual meetings.
Right, and there's, a lot of parallels that can be drawn between just relationship building and actual sales, right? It's, you're trying to ask the right questions and get an idea of who the person is that you're talking to, and kind of what their needs are, what their strengths are, their weaknesses, and ultimately how best you can kind of fit into this puzzle. And it takes some time, and it will take some practice. Some people are kind of natural at that kind of thing. Some people, it takes a little while to kind of get that ball moving, but don't get discouraged. Like it's, getting out and meeting new people and asking those kind of questions. Like unless you are like one of those kind of naturals, like it does take a little time to kind of get your sea legs and get an idea of, what the typical conversation would look like. And like we mentioned earlier, when is like a good time to kind of insert yourself and what you do and what you can offer, or your sales pitch or your pitch deck or whatever it might be.
Yes, I agree. I've always been a really extroverted person, but networking was absolutely a skill that I had to learn. I think the way the conversation goes and the flow that you're referring to is really important, and that's something that you just start to see as you have meeting after meeting, and then reflect on the meetings. What went well, what didn't go well, seeing how other people present themselves and really thinking about it will definitely expedite results. The other thing that I want to say about meetings is, after the meeting, how do we keep in touch with people? And I am such a big proponent on having systems, policies, and procedures in business. And I know a lot of you are intimately familiar with that and creating those for your own businesses. And I have systems, policies, and procedures for networking. So that is who I want to keep in touch with, how often, and how I'm going to keep in touch with them, and really creating systems around this piece that is integral to the sales of my businesses. And I think that in terms of who you want to stay in touch with, we've definitely touched on that, but for me, it's people that I really enjoy, first and foremost, and then people that I really want to continue to help, or I know that they could help me, or both, ideally. And I have some people on my list who I keep in touch with who maybe I don't have that at all, but I think they're just amazing human beings. I love what they're doing. Who knows, maybe in the future somehow our paths will connect or collide, but either way, I want them to be part of my world at this point. They might also be on my list of people that I want to stay in touch with. So what do you have to add about that, Jason?
Well, I think, the big thing you got there, the A, B, and C list, I think that's, we've got it kind of broken out similar in kind of how we do things here. We've got, just it's kind of overgeneralize it a little bit, our A, B, C list, it's like, friends and partners, kind of like, they're both. Like they're people, we see out at events, like we make sure we go have a beer, try to grab dinner, spend extra time with, catch up just as like actual friends do. And then that B list is more along the lines of our kind of more standard connections, like, there's a good business relationship there. Maybe we don't see each other often or at all, so it stays kind of at arm's length. And then, our C lists are kind of those, like I mentioned earlier, the Grumpelstiltskins, like they are fantastic at, a particular type of skill or service or something, and like they're a go-to for a particular situation, and we kind of leave it at that, right? So it's important to kind of build that over time, and you can look at that, you can kind of build those lists out, whether it's investors or potential customers or potential vendors or business partners. Like you can silo those however you need to see fit, but it's going to break down in similar ways for you, whether you're a startup entrepreneur or looking, just a professional working, maybe for a larger company in a particular industry. So it kind of falls out, the same way.
I like that. And then in terms of, staying in touch with all of those people, there might be different interactions based on the level of relationships that you have. My personal philosophy
Right.
about it is I want to keep things interesting, and I want to do that, for myself as well as for all the people in my network. But someone who is an A contact, I just hosted for a woman who was she's a really awesome connection and great person. I created a champagne tasting, and we went one night and tasted a few champagnes and had cheese and hung out and spent time together. People who were just on my network overall, I one year sent Thanksgiving cards, and then another year I might do holiday cards, and kind of trying to switch it up so that there's something interesting about our relationship and about being connected with me. And I try to make it a personal policy of doing that, but I think in terms of staying in touch, people could do whatever they want. The most important thing is having consistency and staying in touch.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Consistency is key, but the one thing that I will say is that there's not a hard and fast rules about like frequency, right? So
Wow.
there's not like, hey, every month you should be emailing these guys. Every 3 months or once a quarter, you should be sending them a gift basket. Every Christmas they should be getting this. There's not a spreadsheet with a list of dates and durations where you can sit down and say, okay, my A list, this is when I need to reach out to them. You'll get a feel over time as you build out this network of connections, and you build like true long-lasting relationships. You'll get an idea of what person just needs to like hear from you via email, maybe every 6 months, or which person needs to get a gift basket on their birthday, and regular phone calls. You get an idea, and even within your A, B, and C groups, there'll be situations in those groups where it's like, hey, this particular person loves it when I give them a phone call, or this person over here, only time I hear from them is when I send them an email. Can't get them text message, can't get them out and about for a drink, can't get them to pick up the phone. Like if I email them, I hear from them right back. But so that's just a long way of saying that they're outside of, the key thing, as Jessica mentioned, is the consistency. Like whatever you end up putting together, just stick with it and, make modifications as you see fit and as you get to learn, what these people like and how they operate over time.
Yes, I think it's easy to, in the world that we live in, it's easy to be delighted and fascinated by the new people. And there are certainly always new people to meet and become involved with, but it's really important to remember that we've spent all this time developing the relationships of people we know and keeping those up and deepening those to the extent that it makes sense. And I think what you said is really insightful, which is being thoughtful about the individual that you're dealing with and how they like to stay in touch is another piece of building a solid relationship.
And another thing to keep in mind for yourself, especially kind of in the earlier days, is bandwidth. There are some people out there in the world that, we call them super connectors. And if they don't know a guy, they know a guy that knows a guy. That's basically
Right.
how it plays out. I mean, I'm in New York City, and if you're in New York City in the tech world, you know who Gary Sharma is from Gary's Guide. So that's a guy who has made it his mission to know every single person in the New York City tech startup community. So that's literally all he does. That's his job. He does an amazing job at it. He makes a living at it. But I mean, it's because his bandwidth now is exclusively networking. So if you're starting a company from scratch, like you've got time, you need to worry about growing your business, possibly hiring. You might be working on the engineering side. You have development you have to worry about. You've got employees that you have to worry about. So, you can't afford to spend your entire waking day, every single day, just getting out and meeting new people. So keeping in mind like your bandwidth and how much time you can spend, putting forth that effort to meet people and attend events and that sort of stuff. But to, kick back to Jessica's point, to actually provide value to the network that you already have. So stretching yourself too thin is not going to pay off for you in the long run. So, that's something that, some people just have a gift for it, like Gary does here in New York City. If you got the gift, then that's awesome. But for like myself, like I have limited bandwidth, and so I have I have to know when to say, okay, I've got enough in front of me right now. I've got enough people that, in addition to the work I have to do every day, like enough people that, I kind of manage from a networking perspective, that I can manage kind of current business dealings and referrals and back and forth. So just another note, something to keep kind of in your back pocket as you're thinking through this.
Yeah, I think too, one of my greatest mentors taught me something a couple years after I started my business, and I would have loved to know this in the beginning, but the faster that we can get clear on who the people are that we want in our network, that might be type of person, what they do, and it also might be people by name, but the faster we can get clear on that, the more tailored that your network is towards the people who you can benefit and they can benefit you. Or I think I started out just kind of throwing the spaghetti at the wall and seeing what stuck. And that is not a good use of time, especially if you're a person who has the other obligations that you were talking about.
Right. Well, we've got a few minutes left here, so we've got some good questions that came in. So I want to take a few minutes to kind of answer some questions. Just as a reminder to everyone, you can use the questions panel there in your GoToWebinar console to submit questions. If we can't get to your questions today, or if something groundbreaking hits you after the fact, which happens to all of us, our contact information is listed there. We're happy to speak with you after the fact. Jessica, I'll jump into the questions here. I'll ask you these questions, and we can just kind of chat it out from there. This first one is kind of interesting, one we don't see kind of so blatantly thrown out there, but what do you think about advisors who promise introductions but want to enter an advisory agreement in exchange of equity?
I would say, well, I guess it would depend. Are they requiring the advisory agreement in exchange for equity? And
yeah, it sounds like that's the case here for this one.
In exchange for introductions. I'm not crazy about anyone saying, in exchange for an introduction, you have to do this. It seems like introductions would ideally be made, I really believe in you, this is awesome, or, what you're working on could be a great connection for this person, and I want to do it. With that being said, a lot of advisors, a big piece of what they're to do would be make introductions, and a lot of times, the company may not be paying the person as a consultant or doesn't have the capacity or the desire to do that, and getting equity instead is a great deal for both parties, especially where the advisor believes in the business and wants to bring this person into their network or this company into their network, and vice versa. So I guess it really depends on the feeling with which that question came from, but if it feels like it has to be done, I think that doesn't seem great or ideal.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Usually, from what we've seen, it kind of works the exact opposite direction. Like you reach out to, again, someone in your network, either directly or through a recommendation, and you set up an advisor agreement with this person. And it could be because they have connections in the ecosystem, like they have great investor connections, they have great vendor connections, whatever it might be. Or they're great, they're a fantastic programmer based on what the underpinnings of your software might be. There's a variety of reasons you can go out and choose an advisor, but usually you're kind of vetting that and putting the right advisors in place that match whatever your current needs are. I would beware of someone that's coming to you and making promises based on a exchange for a piece of your business.
Right.
I mean,
work with. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please jump right in.
Well, I was just going to say, when we work with clients who are starting an advisory relationship with someone, and a big piece of that is that the advisor is going to make introductions, it's usually the dynamic that the founder has found someone who they know to be well connected, and either has approached them or they're establishing a relationship where a big piece of the relationship is making the connections. And while we don't usually document, what connections or how many will be made in exchange for this equity, it is really important that there's a clear discussion about expectations and to make sure everybody's on the same page, and sometimes to document in more detail what is agreed upon so there's no misunderstanding about what you're giving your equity for. But I do think that's a much different situation than someone coming and saying, oh, I could connect you with all these people if you give me this, is a little suspect.
Right. The short answer for this one is to do your homework. Like ask
Yes.
around, find out as much you can about kind of what the bona fides of this particular person, past performance, that sort of stuff, because that can get sticky fast. We'll jump into another question here. I like this question a lot. If at a networking meeting with a lot of people, how long should each conversation be? I mean, is it typical to cut off conversations if you can tell the person won't be useful? I love this question.
I love the question too. It's very honest and I like it. I would say, useful is another way to say I don't have chemistry with them or I don't want to do business with this person. 100%. I think you're doing yourself and the other person a favor. And I do this all the time just to say, it was such a pleasure to meet you. I really enjoyed learning XYZ about you. I hope you have a great night. And, thank you, and walk away. And I'm not making promises about anything in the future. There's really no need to do that. If you don't see this going anywhere from your perspective, don't waste your time. You're there for business.
Yeah, if, you can do that. That's fantastic. If you are someone that's more along the conflict avoidance type of route, which I was for a long time, I'll admit, just kind of like, I'm going to go step out and take this call. I've got to go to the restroom, whatever, and
Yes.
Just exchange cards. Like, hey, it was great to meet you. Maybe I'll see you around the room. And that's totally cool as well. Finding kind of an out to kind of get you out of that particular discussion is fine too. It's a networking meeting. Everybody there is doing the exact same thing. Like, there's no one's going to be heartbroken that you broke off to go speak with someone else in the room. So that's, it's a perfectly acceptable method or, reason to just kind of get out so you can be chatting with someone else. But again, fantastic question. Another one that came in, we'll do a couple more because we're running over the half hour here. A couple more, wrap it up. And this is a great question and one that we discuss kind of internally a lot on our side, Jessica, is when to cut bait with someone that just hasn't, started well as a possible, strong connection and hasn't played out like that.
I would say for me personally, I would cut bait with someone who, maybe we've had the conversation that you and I discussed earlier in the call, and either maybe their business has changed and they're not going to be referring me business, or maybe they say they will, I'm still thinking of you and I want to connect you to this person, and they don't, or they don't follow through with their word. When things are happening like that, you can feel when there's a loss of interest from someone, and sometimes that happens. We grow apart in relationships, or maybe I grow apart in the relationship. I'm not going to pursue the connection and keeping in touch. And all of this and everything that we're talking about today, but this question in particular is just another example of that, is it's really meaningful and helpful when we can pause for a moment and take a look at our relationships and take a look at this relationship in particular and just ask, myself, is this a relationship I want to continue to pursue? Am I willing to keep giving into it? Am I getting benefits out of it? And if the answer is no on any of that, then, it's probably not something that I'm going to be spending my time and energy on. And I want to just be clear that getting benefits out of the relationship could be a lot of different things. That could be you enjoy the person, you see some potential in the future, they send you business, they make connections. So it's not just, are they sending me clients or business?
Right. Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. It's, it's very similar to how we look at things here. And ultimately, you'll know when it's time, when you feel like there's, to Jessica's point, you're not getting anything out of this relationship, and it's time to, it's not like you have to send a Dear John letter or break up with them or anything else. It's just a relationship that ultimately, kind of gets put in stasis, and then maybe it's like a networking event where you both are attending, or a conference, or you just happen to be having coffee in the same shop one day, and you can sit down, and maybe at that time there's a chance to kind of restart the fire. So it's never good to burn bridges. It's something we never recommend, but you can certainly press pause on that sort of relationship, and maybe down the road, as maybe some parameters change, maybe there's a chance to kind of get things going again and have a fruitful relationship between the both of you.
Yes, I like that. I like that.
So, Jessica, I want to give you a moment here for any kind of final thoughts. Tell them about the workbook, of course, that you have available, and then we'll kind of wrap it up from there.
Okay. Well, I have this saying called "Little hinges swing big doors," which is we can do tiny things in our lives and our businesses to make a huge difference in our results. And I would be so honored if anyone wants to check out coursecorrected.com/mindset, where I have a workbook that people can follow up on this idea and see places in their business where they may be able to make big changes by changing some small things. And overall, you can get more information about my Entrepreneur Success Program there at coursecorrected.com. So it's been such a pleasure being here. I really appreciate it, Jason.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica, for joining us today. This was an awesome webinar. As a quick reminder, the recording will be sent out within 48 hours, and then we'll also have this up on our YouTube channel as well for Early Growth Financial Services. So on behalf of Jessica Olmon from Course Corrected, I'm Jason Kennedy from EGFS. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your week.